Australia was occupied pastoralists for a long time, and it took many years before the land was finally formally granted to them. And so what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to sort of go backwards. What happens before that time? I'm going to talk about Crown land. All right, so Crown land, before it's granted, alienated as it's called, is Crown land. Now I'm going to talk about Crown land before it's alienated from the Crown. Now, there are many different ways in which land has been alienated, different forms of grant. I'm just going to concentrate on two types. And these are two types which appear across a lot of the state, and one type which is fairly specific to gold areas. So I've picked the improvement purchase, which is specific to gold areas, and conditional purchase, which operates pretty well right across the state. Now, I'm going to be dealing with Lands Department correspondence. Now, the Lands Department had numerous branches. I'm not going to bamboozle you with all the different branches because it's very confusing as it is. Even I have trouble remembering which branch was right. But I'm going to talk about these files and so on, which are to do with the management of land, with the alienation of land, and with the leasing of land. And these files, which are now held at State Records of New South Wales, are vast. There are thousands and thousands of boxes of these files. They are fascinating things to look into, but it's often very difficult to find the file that's relevant to what you are researching, either the person or the place. Now, I'm going to give you a method in which to do it. It won't always work because, as always happens with archival research, things go wrong, files get lost. An annotation in a register is sometimes not the correct one, so you end up calling up the wrong file and that sort of thing. But the general process is the one that one should sort of follow. Now, the files themselves are as varied as you can think of. First of all, they will have things in them like formal application forms where people apply for land, either to purchase or to lease. There will often be reports from surveyors, and the report may be as simple as, I've just surveyed this piece of land, I forward the file, or sometimes they will be 8 or 9 pages long, explaining what the land is like, talking about the vegetation, what the nearest town is, where the water sources are, what the soils are, what the underlying rock is, and so on. Some of them can be very detailed indeed. They can be very, very useful if you are doing some sort of a history of a locality, trying to find out, what it was like there well before settlement, or what the resources of that area were. You will sometimes find petitions if a problem arises, petitions from local communities, and these petitions can be wonderful things because if you're researching a particular locality, right, a small town, a locality which no one knows very much about, sometimes these petitions will tell you who's in the town, what sort of things they're doing. They might be a squatter, a selector, I'm a blacksmith, or that sort of thing. They will sort of put this information in the petition, and also the issue that is the source of the petition can be quite interesting as well. There may be printed materials like parish maps. You know those parish maps that are online that Carol showed you? Well, often there will be hard copies of these in a lot of these files, and I've seen dozens of these over the years, and they can be really quite interesting. And sometimes you will find copies of parish maps which don't survive anywhere else. They don't survive in the libraries, they don't survive in the Lands Department, but sometimes in the files you'll find early editions which are now unobtainable elsewhere. And you will often get original survey plans or copies of them. The actual plans will actually go to the plans room. You will also get, if you're lucky, you may get printed materials. Usually it's just a bit of the Government Gazette, but sometimes you will get local newspapers. Sometimes not just a whole page, but a whole local newspaper may just have been inserted in the file. Okay, and if you come from Merinda or something and there's no local newspaper before 1900, you suddenly find an 1885 copy of a Merinda newspaper in the file. Well, you're doing very well indeed. And also you get these, or like what I call occasional oddities. You might get a pamphlet, you might get a leaflet or something. And these are just as varied as you can imagine. This is an example of one that I found in a file totally by accident, looking for something else. And it was a petition from the Chinese. Now, who doesn't know about the Lambing Flat riots here? Good, you're all good Australian historians, you know all about the Lambing Flat. Well, at the end of the Laming Flat Riot, after the European miners had assaulted and taken out the Chinese miners, they all sort of moved south and went to James Roberts' property, which is Currawang, south of Young. And they sort of stayed there for a while. Now, after a while, a lot of them moved elsewhere. And in 1864, a group of them that was in one of the other, I think it was Avalon, realised that the government was giving them compensation for, what they'd lost, their tents, their equipment, and they drew up this petition and they sent it to the government saying, we would like compensation for our losses, which is a fairly normal thing to do. You had a car accident, you expect a bit of insurance. Well, this is, the variation here. We think the government's responsible, so we'll try and get some money out of the government. And so this petition not only has the petition, but it's also got all of the signatures of the Chinese petitioners. And I'm sure that even the people at the back there can see that a lot of those signatures are also in Chinese script. Okay? Now, when you go to State Records, who has been to State Records? Wonderful. I'm actually talking to people that know, what I'm talking about. Who hasn't been to State Records might be more important. Yeah, okay. Well, fair enough. You've got something wonderful to look forward to when you eventually get there. Get a box, for example. This box comes out. This is, a standard archive box. It's got this great big thick, sort of 4-inch pile of papers. Well, okay, wonderful stuff, but is it relevant to what you're looking for? All right, so how do you find what you're looking for? Now, this is a very generalised research method. It's not going to work perfectly in every instance. From 1856 to 1866, there was just the Surveyor General's Department, and most of the files ended up in the Surveyor General's Department. From 1866 onwards, the Lands Department split up into various branches. There's the Miscellaneous Branch, there is the Sales Branch, there is the Alienation Branch, and there's the Roads Branch. I think I might have missed a couple in there. But the ones that will mainly be relevant for my talk is the Miscellaneous Branch or the Sales Branch. And this is important. When you're doing any of this research, you should always carefully note which branch you are in. You'll often find that people will go off on the wrong track. I'm in this particular series, they'll call up a file and they're in completely the wrong branch. You've got to make sure you're in the right particular series. The method works like this, that every time a letter comes in, the clerk that sort of gets it, he picks up his pen and he says, oh, this is letter number, 66616 that I've received today. The next letter is 66617. And they go through like this, and each letter is given this unique number, and it gets entered in the register. And that letter then sort of gets sent to the right person or another department or something, and that goes backwards and forwards. And it comes back to the person and they say, oh, well, there's a new letter on the subject. So they get the old letter and they stick it on the back of the new letter. And this sort of file keeps going forward. It might start in 1866, but it finally gets filed in 1896. I once followed something which started in 1833 and finally ended up in 1936. I won't tell you that horror story. So the file will be sort of, just moves on forever. So it's one of those sorts of things. You've got to make sure that you've got your research procedure correct. All right, now the first part, and this is even before you even get that number, how do you find the number? Which is the important thing, the very first number to start your search. I'll get onto that in a minute. The registers in which these big bound volumes, and they just have numbers running down them and they tell you where the file went. I'll have examples to show you in a minute. And you follow that process through until the letter is finally filed. And unfortunately, government department, they do things differently. Different individuals in the department do things differently. So you'll get a number of notations in the file. So sometimes the file is put away. Well, that's fairly obvious. Sometimes you'll get a wonderful one that says away. And sometimes, here's a good one, filed. That's a pretty obvious one, that one. And the other one, which is this is a real no-brainer. When the land's finally been sold, sometimes they'll just say, deed prepared. What that means is the land's been sold, we've written out the deed, we don't need the papers anymore, we have filed them, but we're not going to say we've filed them, we're just going to say that the deed has been prepared. So you just have to get used to the different terminology. Now, how do you find that first reference? Okay? There's 5 main places you can find the reference. Now, this is good, it's not just one, there's 5 different possibilities. Unfortunately, you will not find the answer to every one in each 5. You might find them in 2 or 3, you might find them in just 1, but you've got to be aware of these different possibilities. 1, there's the parish maps, which Carol introduced you to yesterday. 2, there's the Crown plans. Did you talk about... No, okay, Carol didn't talk about Crown plans. I'm going to use an example further in my talk. Then there's the tenure registers or the tenure cards. These are big bound volumes or a separate series of cards which was maintained by the Lands Department, which were key to each piece of land, which showed you where the correspondence went or what was done with it. And again, I will have some examples to show you in a minute. So don't say you're totally bamboozled yet. You can do that later. 4, there's the New South Wales Government Gazette. Who's used the New South Wales Government Gazette? In the past or in the present day? Obviously, yeah, you can look at the Government Gazette online these days, but in the past, of course, it was a bound, printed volume. Now, a lot of these are available these days from various sources, and I'll show you again how they work. And finally, there are particular indexes and registers which are now held by State Records, which can be used. All right? Now, this is the one that you'll probably all need if you're going to do any of this. You probably need to pick up your pens at this moment and take notes. 1, the actual research process. Get the file reference. And the file reference comes from either the Crown Plan, the Tenure Register, or the New South Wales Government Gazette. 2, you will track that correspondence reference in those registers. I'll have examples further on to show you. And 3, this is the lucky dip one, obtaining the file. You then fill out the slip. Stop laughing, Chris, this is serious. You will actually put in your slip at State Records and you'll take it to the desk and you request the file, and hopefully the file is in the right box. Now stop laughing, Chris. Right, I'll leave that up for a minute just so you can do it. I do have a handout which I'll give out at the end, but I think you need to see this process as I go through it and try and read about it in the handout later and try and match the 2. Here's a visual representation of how it's done. Right, the different research methods from the different starting points. Starting point 1, you start at the parish or town map, then you go to the Crown Plan, then you go to the correspondence register, and then maybe you find the file. And here's another visual representation showing you what they actually look like. There's an image of a Crown Plan, Parish of Burrendong. Then secondly, there's the Crown Plan, which you order up online, pay your $12.40 for. Get your file reference from the Crown Plan. Then you go to the correspondence register, which is that greyish looking image down there, and then finally you end up with the box. Actually, probably not the box, just the file. There's a slightly different version of the process. Again, this is beyond this handout. You start with a parish map or town map, go to the tenure register or tenure card, go to the correspondence register and go to the file. And this again, okay, you've started with the parish map, you've gone to the tenure register, which is a different thing, which is held at State Records, so you can only do this when you really go out to Kingswood. Go to the tenure register and then off to the box. And then finally, do you notice the difference with this one? There's a slightly different aspect about this one. What would it be? One less step. So hopefully, if you can do this one, it makes it easier. Often not available for some pieces of land, but it's go to the Government Gazette, then go to the correspondence register, and then go to the file. Right, so Government Gazette, that's just the letterhead from the Government Gazette, that's the first page. Go to the tenure register, then go to the box. Now, I'll go through these starting points one by one, so you can sort of just some worked examples. I'm going to do an example where you start from the parish or the town map. Now, I'm picking the parish of Burrendong, okay? And these copies are online, as Carol showed you yesterday in her talk. Sometimes historical societies have them as hard copies, and of course things like the State Library, the National Library and so on have copies of them as well. And this one's the 1885 edition, Parish Burrendong, I think it's County Wellington if I remember rightly. I'm looking for portion 45. Portion 45 is really small, so it's a bit hard to show. You can see where the arrow looks at this little portion. Anybody that can't see portion 45, you don't need to go and see your optometrist. It is actually very small. And the sort of information you're looking for, you're going to have to record this from every parish map you do, because you've got to make sure that you've got the information right. Get the land district, you get the number, the holding of the lease number, which is not on this one, but the name of the applicant or the holders, which may be the person up to grant, where the land is, county, parish and portion. Okay, in this case, it's County Wellington, Parish Burrendong, portion 45. Are there any references to correspondence? Okay, maybe not. And here's what we've got. Recorded that information. I won't show the whole parish map because it's just about illegible when I put it on this slide. Land district is Mudgee. There's no holding or lease number shown on the map. It tells you who the holder of the land is. This came from the title block over its side, which I think Carol showed you yesterday. Cornelius Driscoll was the man who was the holder of the land. And it's County Wellington, Parish Burrendong, portion 45. There's no correspondence reference, okay? Now, I've jumped a couple of steps here. I then went to the list of parish numbers at the side, which again I think Carol, you showed them, didn't you, Carol?
I didn't talk about them, but we showed where the following.
Yeah. On each map it's got a list of parish numbers used, and portion 45, it will give you the number for the Crown Plan. Now in this case the Crown Plan is W6711527, and I've ordered that up. I'll go into a little more detail on this in another slide, okay? And that cost me $12.40. It's the only way you can get them. You actually have to buy them online from the Department of Lands, or you can go in and buy a hard copy. Now, Crown Plans. Crown Plans almost always have two numbers. There'll be a letter. In this case, the letter W means it's County Wellington. Each plan will have an individual number, and there'll be a series number. And the series number for portion surveys in County Wellington is 1527. Sorry. Yeah. So each county has a different small number, and things like schools have different numbers. Reserves have different numbers. So there's there's sort of series numbers. It's a bit like a library. You can imagine that all the things at 994, is that Australian history, I think? Yeah, 994. So all the books at 994 are Australian history. So you know that all the plans at 1527 are portion surveys County Wellington. And you want the particular plan, so in this case it's 671. And this is the tenure register. This is a register for the conditional purchase. I've just used this example. And these are big bound registers, and each conditional purchase has a number. And look, I've used this one not because it's local, but because I can actually show you the top and what the entry looks like. 1885, conditional purchase number 6. It's Jacob's story. He's taken up land, and the right-hand side shows you it's County Northumberland, Parish Narara, and he's taken up a conditional purchase. And what the arrow is pointing to is the file reference, where that was filed. And that's the reference that you're always looking for with these things. And tenure card, now tenure cards were brought in 1907. They replaced the bound registers. It's the same sort of information, and it records, changes to the land and so on. Eventually you're looking for a file number. I won't go into any detail on that. And this is the easy one, the Government Gazette, okay? A page from the Government Gazette. This is a notice of sale of land as improved land in goldfields. All right, the sort of thing that you get around Gulgong, that you get around Ophir, that you get around Young, that you get around Chuon. You get all those places around the state where there was gold was found. You could buy land as an improved purchase, and I'll go into some detail later. And that's what they look like. Now, it'll tell you registration number, the applicant, where the land is, how much they have to pay, and so on. This is a notice that says, this is the file number, so and so, you have to pay this amount of land and then we'll grant it to you. And this is what you're looking for. Registration number, the very first one up there in the red box, that's the file number. So if you're actually looking for one of these, you get one of these, okay, I've got the file number, you can actually take that and, you know, chop out 3 or 4 steps of this complicated process I've shown you, and hopefully find the file at State Records. In this case, Joshua Vickery is purchasing 1 acre, 3 roods, 39 1/4 purchase. That's the good old days of imperial measurement. Portion 189, Parish Tambarura, County Wellington. And he has to pay a total of £33 for this piece of land. But with that title reference, in this case, MS, Miscellaneous Branch, 74, that's 1874, it's letter 5561. It won't just be his letter, it'll be his application, it'll be the surveyor's report. There's probably a sketch plan done by the surveyor. There's probably an assessment by the assessor who comes along and says, oh, there's improvements on this land are worth so much, and a description of what's on the land and so on. Right, and here comes the example. Now I'm going to talk about Parish Burrendong, and I'm going to give you an improvement purchase in Parish Burrendong. Now the 1861 Crown Lands Alienation Act, which also gives people the right to buy land as conditional purchase, also gave them the right to purchase improved land on proclaimed goldfields or mineral fields on the basis of their improvement. So if you were a gold miner and had a miner's right, you had to have a miner's right. If you held a miner's right, you'd build a house, you had a pretty good garden, you had a hotel erected on a piece of land, maximum of half an acre in a town, 2 acres outside proclaimed towns, you could apply to buy that land. Now, of course, not all applications were finalised. People would apply and if someone's rejected. But they could apply and they would hopefully get this piece of land. All right, so I'm doing portion 45, okay? I'll send you back to that Crown plan that I sent. This is that reference block on the parish map, reference to small portions. So portion 45, and the Crown plan number is W671, small number is 1527. Then Carol showed you how to do this yesterday. I'm sure this is all familiar to you. You all went home and did it last night, didn't you? Good, yeah, it's quite simple. A quick way to sort of run your maximum up on your credit card. So you go to buy a Crown plan. Oh, this is an old image. It says $12.15. I think I've done this talk before. And then now $12.40. Okay, first step, you go and order the Crown plan and you put the numbers in the box, and as you can see, I'm being lazy, I've used the same image I've used before. It should be 671 in the first box and it should be 1527 in the second box. Fortunately, the people at the back probably cannot see that I do not have the right numbers in that box. Okay, Wizzo, $12.40 later, and usually about 30 seconds. That's about how long it takes for these plans to be sent from the Lands Department website to your inbox. You just have to put it, your email address in, whiz, it's there in 30 seconds. Sometimes it takes a minute, but usually 30 seconds it's there. And you've got this plan, which is a digitised copy of that original survey, and that survey not only shows you what is on the land, it also gives you a file reference, which is what you're looking for. And so if you're in Mudgee or you're in Broken Hill or whatever, you can, if you're really interested in a piece of land and you want to sort of do this a little bit more quickly, you say, is it worth chasing this? And working up all your research before you go to Kingswood and State Records. You can do some of this at home, literally do it at home. So of course I did this at home, or in the office. And this correspondence reference, it tells me, is MS69/6059. So what's MS stand for? And what's the 69? That's right. And which letter number is it? Good, and that's what I'm going to look for when I get to State Records. And I then go to the Correspondence Register, just to check, and Chris Yates, of course, is nodding his head. They have so many people that write the file number in and ask for it, but it's not there. And they say, did you check the Correspondence Register? And people say, no. He said, you should always check the Correspondence Register. Okay, right, so you go to the register, which is a bound volume, and you look up, you get the 1869 register, and you look up 6054, and people at the back probably can't see this, but you can see the red arrow, and what that little squiggle is that looks like a spider's gone mad on the end of that page, it says deed prepared. What does deed prepared mean? It's been sold. Okay, the file should be there. And, okay, I've called this up, and this is what's in that file for this piece of land, okay? The land is now, it's been resumed by the government, it's part of the land for Burrendong Dam, but it was, it was a piece of land that was being mined, etc. in the 1860s. So that's the cover page, tells you it's Mr. Briscoe. I think it's a Daniel, I think, yep. And here is his actual application, which is in the same file, the papers are all together. December 1867, here, Cornelius Driscoll applies for this land. What's on it? A public house, store and outbuildings. So it's a pretty substantial improvement, and he's obviously wanting to buy that so that, he gets the benefit of freehold. And this is the report from the surveyor, licensed surveyor, Wilbraham, that was his name, Wilbraham Simpson. The improvements are a public house and outbuildings worth £80. Okay, so Simpson says there's a public house and outbuildings worth £800 on the land. Do you remember that Crown plan I showed you just a few images ago? There's a sketch in the file of that Crown plan, and that sketch is actually tracing, and you get an enlarged piece, and you can see the improvements on land. You can see the inn, you can see the outbuildings, you can see the buildings nearby. So if you're doing research in Goldfields land, in an area, say, like around Gulgong, for example, which is your local area, but all the area down through, up towards Wellington and so on, all of those sorts of gold places like Hargraves and whatever, there are going to be improvement purchases. Not every piece of land is going to be improvement purchased, but there'll be a lot of these little portions. Here's just a sample of some of the improvement purchases in the Mudgee area. I've got just to show you the sort of information you find. Portion 67, the Parish of Makerala. 1 slab cottage, clearing, ring barking and fencing. Okay, well he actually purchased it for that. In this parish unnamed, portion 49, Thomas Whelan purchased a cottage, outhouse and garden. In portion 41, Vincent Caravagniel, you have a wonderful tradition of non-Anglo people settling in your district, don't you? And he had, now look at this, a house fencing on 1,000 vines. So, winemaking's got a bit of a tradition here, hasn't it? And 50 fruit trees. The other thing about the sale procedures are that the Gold Commissioner always had to certify that the purchase of this land would not affect mining interest. In other words, it's not going to affect someone's mine claim. And the Gold Commissioner, the applicant and the holder of miner's right resides on the land, etc., and it's not required for mining purposes. T.A. Brown, and of course we know that he was Rolf Bolterwood, famous for the author of Robbery Under Arms. So you see a lot of these files, he's signed those, the land's not required for, mining purposes. So you end up with some really interesting stuff in these files. Now I'm going to take you through a conditional purchase. Hopefully I've got enough time. I'm going to go through the parish of Merinda. All right, now conditional purchase is a different, I won't say kettle of fish, but it's the same Land Act. Under Section 13 of the Crown Lands Alienation Act of 1861, the one that was passed, John Robertson, who we've already heard mentioned today, this afternoon, the famous John Robertson. This act allowed people to take up from 40 acres up to 320 acres, later increased to 640 acres as a conditional purchase. called a conditional purchase because you picked it up and it was conditional on you actually paying off the price of the land, which was a £1 breaker. Now I'm going to look at portion 67 in Parish, Merinda. And I just picked this one out at random. And here we'll have this whole series of conditional purchases taken up by people with Chinese names in the parish of Merinda. And I thought, there's an interesting story here. What is it? Okay, so that's the parish map. Conditional purchase 1876, number 53. How do I find this? First of all, I get the correspondence numbers, as I've shown you, from the register or the tenure card. Then I follow them in the correspondence registers, and then I find the file put away, deed prepared, and then hopefully I go and harass the poor staff at the desk on State Records as to why the file wasn't there. This is what the conditional purchase register looked like for this one. You've got to imagine this is further down the page. Okay, so that's his name there, and then there are listed all the different people to which the land was transferred before it's finally paid off and sold. So the next name is Arkui, Commercial Banking Company of Sydney. Then it goes to Arkui again. And then it goes to someone who I can't read. And then finally it goes to the Commercial Banking Company again. And if you look at the parish map today for that piece of land, it shows that it was finally granted to the Commercial Banking Company of Sydney. This does not mean that the bank was the owner, because the way the law operated was that when the land is finally paid off, the registered holder at that time is the one who is registered on in this case, the certificate of title. And so it will be registered in the name of the bank, but within a short amount of time, whoever was the holder will probably pay it off and it's finally transferred to him. It just means that when the land was paid off, it was transferred or granted to the actual registered holder. And that often it was the mortgagee or the bank, right? So in this case, you see, the land's been transferred a number of times, so our friend Hong Sing Tong is not the person who finally ends up with this piece of land, it's someone else. Now that's the other side, and this is double page spread in the register, and that reference there, you can't make it up for all, they haven't put the zero in, so, and it translates as CS, which means Conditional Sales Branch, 04, which means 1904, and it's 2143, and DEP means it's Departmental Branch. Look, if you are confused by this, don't be confused. If you do one of these and you go to State Records staff are very, very experienced in helping people through this. And if you are totally bamboozled by what I've said, which is quite possible, you'll sort of get a taste of what you can do. But if you go to State Records, they will literally lead you through it, and they're very good with this. They do a lot of this now, and they send away lots of very happy people. Finally, I've requested the particular file, and that's the file reference down there. It was actually at that number, 4th of May 1876, 40 acres, and this is how it's described down the bottom here. 40 acres on Maru right bank near the Dray crossing to Merinda. I knew I was going to get something wrong eventually. Okay. And this is the surveyor's report. In this case, it's licensed surveyor Robertson. And the improvements, which means the building, says huts, £12, fencing, £20, and clearing, £40. Because depending what you had to do, £1 of improvements for each acre. So 60 acre, you had to do 60 acres of improvements. 340 acres, you had to do £340 worth of improvements, which actually can work out to be quite a bit. And there's a nice little sketch. It's not the proper Crown plan, but this is a sketch that's been put in the file, and it shows, and it's done by Robertson, of course, and it's enlarged there. You can see his huts. There's 2 huts there, and there's 2 huts there near the river. And you can see the fencing, and you can see the cleared, and this one says crop. I don't know what crop it is. I'm not actually put in wheat or, usually it's wheat. Okay. and so on. You get that sort of information in these files. They can be very, very revealing. After 3 years, they had to swear a statutory declaration about the value of their improvements and whether they reside on the land. And this one is really interesting because most of these were Hong Sing Tong, his mark. Obviously he can't write, but in fact he can write. This particular one piece of paper in the file, he signed his name in Chinese characters. A few years later, after he's transferred it, the Conditional Purchase Inspector, so the Conditional Purchase Inspector, William Brown, comes down and says, the land is now held by R. Cooey, who we, of course, saw in that register, who is a storekeeper and a farmer, who now uses it as a tobacco farm. Do you have a history of tobacco farming in this area? Well, here you've learned something. All of you Mudgee people, here's some research you're going to have to follow. The history of tobacco farming in the district. Okay? The improvements were a house, 30 by 15 of slabs, 3 rooms, skillion roof, iron roof, £60. Looks like he's made a few improvements. A kitchen, £4. A slab tobacco shed, 30 by 12, £40. An open tobacco shed, 40 by £14, 14 feet, £35. A bark tobacco shed, 50 feet by 12, £20. So he's going in for tobacco in a big way. So here we are. Here's some exciting research for someone in the district. Just to go over what I've showed you, the research process. 1, get the file reference. 1, you can either get it from the Crown Plan, you can get it from the Tenure Register, or you can get it from the New South Wales Government Gazette. Okay? For conditional purchases, it's probably best not to use the Government Gazette because it's very time consuming. The other process, even though you think it's time consuming, it's quicker that way. Track those file references in the correspondence registers. And the third step, which you get to at the end, hopefully, is actually get the file. And look, the last sort of thing there, the basic procedure is the same for all tenure types. They're going to be you have a slightly different starting point, but if it's an improvement purchase, a conditional purchase, a suburban holding, which is a settlement purchase, or a homestead farm, or any one of a number of different tenure types, it's the same process. It just sort of works slightly differently. Okay, thank you. Questions? Anybody? Questions? Yes?
They're actually purchasing their own.
Yeah, with the improvement purchase, yeah. Miners had the right to sort of live on a small piece of land, but they didn't have the right to buy it, but the legislation gave them the right. It was originally created in Victoria after the Eureka, and all the different things that happened there. And miners, when the Act was brought in 1861, they actually gave them this right. And if the improvement was going to affect gold mining, for example, if it's really on a piece of land which is being mined and the shack is virtually next door to it, they won't sort of let him buy it. But yeah, they're really basically buying, what they're doing. And this is the thing, Carolyn showed some very interesting stuff yesterday, but there's often a prehistory before that formal, sort of granting of land occurs. So you can get this. Right, any other questions, queries?
I was going to say, if you're interested in conditional purchase in particular, we did, when I was working in State Records, we did 2 archives in brief, which are free, and they're just like little fact sheets, and you can download them from the website. And there are 2 which relate to conditional purchase. One gives the background, and the other one has a step-by-step process for how you can actually research conditional purchase.
Let's break for 15 minutes and come back for the raffle and our final section. So thank you very much.